I'm Professor of Islam here at the university. I'm dean of one of the undergraduate colleges and currently the director of the Middle East Institute. And it is an enormous pleasure to welcome you here today and to welcome our panelists at this absolutely momentous moment in the history of Arab societies. This evening, obviously, we're going to be discussing Libya primarily, but Libya in the context of the broader Arab revolt. And it's my pleasure to be able to introduce to you our distinguished panelists, each of whom will just stand when I introduce them. Eventually, they will end up here for the panel discussion. Let me begin with Professor Peter Gran, who is currently Professor of History at Temple University. His research and teaching interests include modern Arab studies, comparative world history, and political economy. His most recently completed book is about world history, and he's refocusing on modern Egyptian history and will most probably be carrying on a long-term project comparing Egyptian and Italian history. Among his many publications are the books Beyond Eurocentrism, A New View of Modern World History, Islamic Roots of Capitalism, Egypt from 1760 to 1840, and Medical Pluralism in Arab and Egyptian History. Professor Ali Ahmida is chair of the Department of Political Science and Lutke Chair of Liberal Arts and Sciences at the University of New England. A Freudian slip. He is the author of The Making of Modern Libya, State Formation, Colonization, and Resistance. Forgotten Voices, Power and Agency in Colonial and Post-Colonial Libya. Post-Orientalism, Critical Reviews in North African Social and Cultural History. Khaled is the author of 4 extraordinary books of poetry: Tocqueville, Amorisco, Zodiac of Echoes, and Ismailiya Eclipse. He's translated 9 books of contemporary Arab poetry by a number of extraordinary poets. He has won numerous awards, among them the Academy of American Poets Fellowship Prize, the PEN American Center Award for Poetry Translation, a Guggenheim Fellowship, and an Alfred Hodder Fellowship from Princeton University, an NEA Translation Grant, and 3 Pushcart Prizes. His poems have appeared in Poetry, the Kenyon Review, Antioch Review, Best American Poetry, and many other journals and anthologies. We are enormously privileged to have this distinguished group of panelists with us tonight. But I would also like to thank especially one of our own Columbia students who's really put this entire panel together in, I would say, about 20 minutes, given the current political situation. Yussef Assed is an accomplished scholar, a Libyan by descent, and an individual of extraordinary energy and commitment to the study of the Arab world. And so it's my pleasure to introduce Yussef. He happens to be a student in the college that I run, so that makes me especially proud.
Thank you, and thank you, Dr. Ron, for being gracious enough to allow me to do this. I would like to briefly discuss 3 Libyas. One, Libya before February 17th, 2011, which I'll refer to as Gaddafi's Libya. 2, the Libya of today, February 17th to March 3rd, which I'll refer to as Libya of the people. And finally, 3, the Libya of tomorrow. Gaddafi's Libya. From the moment Colonel Muammar al-Gaddafi and his fellow military officers came to power in a coup on September 1st, 1969, the Gaddafi regime has faced constant challenges to its power. In the early years of the regime, the United States and its allies felt that stability could be achieved in Libya through an anti-communist military regime that would partner in the Cold War policy of containment. As a result, Western powers allied themselves with Libya in a relationship of mutual assurance. Although this relationship soured rather quickly over the past 41 and a half years, and despite numerous atrocities perpetrated by the regime and its funding of countless civil wars, terrorist groups, and in the last 25 years or so, Islamic fundamentalists, Western powers have mostly employed a carrot-and-stick approach with Gaddafi's Libya. As a major oil and gas producer, Libya's petroleum reserves are the 9th largest in the world, and its natural gas reserves are 23rd. Despite numerous sanctions against Gaddafi's Libya, which were ultimately lifted, Libya's hydrocarbon resources have remained on the world market, and in 2004, the United States was restored bilateral relations with Libya, removing Libya from the list of state sponsors of terror. But, sadly, as recent events have confirmed, the Gaddafi regime has not renounced terror. Due to a 2010 extension of Libya's unconventional weapons disarmament, unfortunately granted to the regime, Libya possesses an unknown quantity of mustard gas, evidence of which has been discovered during the past 2 weeks. After the 2003 rapprochement with the global community and the 2004 restoration of bilateral relations with the United States, one of Colonel Gaddafi's sons, Yussef Assed al-Gaddafi, emerged as the heir apparent to his father's throne. Academics, policy analysts, government officials, and members of the media the world over hailed Libya's monumental about-face, and Yussef was promoted and increasingly characterized as a progressive reformer. He was said to be enlightened, educated, facing a heavy burden as the son of the leader. He gave speeches decrying Libya's political situation, calling for the establishment of a new constitution and a rebuilding of Libyan civil society. Sadly, we were all fooled. Gaddafi's Libya began to revitalize its military capacity, signing contracts with major arms manufacturers in Europe, including Fabrique Nationale, General Dynamics UK, and a licensed Greek subcontractor of the small arms manufacturer Heckler & Koch. The Gaddafi regime also signed major arms deals with Russia and France for the delivery of warplanes, helicopters, and armored vehicles. Thankfully, most, if not all, of the armored vehicles, tanks, jets, and helicopters are yet to be delivered. According to UN Security Council Resolution 1970, ratified unanimously last weekend by all members of the Security Council, the Gaddafi regime is barred from purchasing any more arms. Much of the Gaddafi regime's destructive foreign policy is not well understood, and Libya's interconnected nature with the African continent and the Middle East, while documented, is not widely publicized. The 1980s witnessed the birth of several US-Libya proxy wars in the African continent, one in Chad, another nurtured in Sudan through the militarization of Darfur, and third, Libya's attempt to achieve hegemony over both Chad and Sudan. While Gaddafi's actions in Chad and the larger African continent are no secret, the regime's method of conscription of young Libyan men has remained veiled. Although the conscription age in Libya is 18, boys as young as 13 have been kidnapped from their homes, transported to Chad, and left with nothing but a Kalashnikov and instructions to simply go fight. Kidnappings are a favored method employed by the regime useful in silencing the voices of all those who speak out against it. A Libya of today. When protests erupted in Tunisia on December 17, 2010, after Tunisian Mohamed Bouazizi's self-immolation, a mass uprising through peaceful protest chased President Zain al-Abidine bin Ali out of the country on January 14. Soon after, protests in Egypt successfully forced the resignation of President Hosni Mubarak, and with the fall of the Egyptian autocrat, for the first time in nearly 40 years, the Libyan people saw their chance for independence from dictatorship. February 17th was designated the Day of Rage by members of the regime opposition both within the country and outside. However, protests began 2 days early on February 15th in response to the arrest of attorney Fathi Tabir. Tabir was a human rights activist and attorney for the victims of the 1996 massacre of political prisoners in Libya's Abu Slim prison, where more than 1,200 prisoners were executed over the course of several hours. Over the last 16 days, protests in Libya have been met with unspeakable brutality by the regime. In anticipation of the uprising, the Libyan government imported and continues to import mercenaries, mostly from sub-Saharan Africa, from countries such as Niger, Chad, Zimbabwe, Ghana, Sudan, and Mali. As the world has come to realize, the Libyan military was not a conventionally organized force, but a series of semi-autonomous groups, including some regiments controlled by the leader's sons. Saif has taken on the role of spin doctor and major architect of the massacre of the Libyan people. Much of eastern Libya, including Libya's second largest city of Benghazi, has been liberated from the Gaddafi regime, while Gaddafi maintains control over Tripoli, its suburbs, as well as Sirte and Sabha. Zawiya, a western city in Libya, as well as several others, claim independence from the regime and allegiance to the revolutionary forces. One of the major success stories of the Libyan uprising is Benghazi. Its residents have banded together to rebuild civil society, publishing their own newspaper, and as we speak, Benghazi is launching its own independent satellite television station. Opposition government leaders have united across tribal and regional lines to form a provisional government, led by former Justice Minister Mustafa Abdel-Jalil. Although the Gaddafi regime is on its last leg, and numerous politicians, soldiers, and diplomats have defected from the Gaddafi camp in record time, the regime continues to brutally murder, kidnap, and punish the Libyan people. In Tripoli, violence has claimed countless lives. Kidnappings, rapes, and beatings are a daily occurrence, and no one is immune. Food stocks, medical supplies are nearly depleted. The shelves of Tripolitanian supermarkets are empty. There is no food. There is a desperate shortage of blood across nearly all Libyan hospitals, and relief efforts have so far been unable to meet the challenge. The Libyan government has sent warplanes across the country, dropping bombs on anti-regime forces, as well as protesters. In the last 48 hours, the regime has attacked both Brega and Ajdabiya in eastern Libya, and casualties have been reported. Although Saif made a statement to Sky News yesterday claiming that the bombings were just to, quote, frighten but not kill militias and gain control over oil installations, Brega houses one of the largest natural gas power plants in the eastern region of Libya, and if destroyed, it would literally leave hundreds of thousands of Libyans in the dark. the Libya of tomorrow. While it is in vogue to claim that the Libya of tomorrow is descending into civil war and will fall into the hands of Islamic fundamentalists due to the fact that Libya lacks political, civic, and bureaucratic institutions, it must be remembered that even in Gaddafi's Libya before the uprising, basic institutions existed. They were in deep decay, exceedingly corrupt, and on the whole neglected, but Libya is not simply an open desert of warring tribes. Since the monarchical period and throughout the Gaddafi regime, Libya has exhibited universities, a social security program, universal forms of healthcare, unemployment insurance, and other welfare programs. Libya's institutions are in dire straits and have ceased to function, but that does not mean they do not exist or cannot be rebuilt. Many Libyans, both within the country and in the diaspora, are highly skilled and educated. They simply need a chance to build Libya of tomorrow.